There is a kind of wealth this world has never been able to fully explain. Not the wealth built by inheritance alone. Not the wealth assembled by exceptional intelligence, relentless ambition, or fortunate timing in a favorable market. Not the wealth that arrives with a prosperous season and quietly dissolves when the next economic disruption arrives. There is a wealth that operates by entirely different laws older than any financial system ever constructed by human hands. Deeper than any investment strategy ever devised by human minds, more reliable than any market that has ever opened and closed on the face of this earth. And Psalm 112 is its blueprint. This is not a psalm about prosperity in the shallow surface level sense that word has been stripped down to in modern conversation. This is a psalm about dynasty, about the covenant-backed, heaven-engineered, generationally transferable wealth that begins in the soul of one man or one woman who makes the decision to fear the Lord and then flows unstoppably, irreversibly, by deliberate divine design into every generation that follows. It is wealth with a bloodline, prosperity with a legacy, financial flourishing that do. It's not peak in one lifetime and then fade, but compounds through time in ways that no earthly financial instrument was ever designed to replicate. Look honestly at the financial landscape of this generation. Debt has become the default posture of entire households, not because people are lazy, not because they lack ambition, not because they have failed to work hard enough or sacrifice enough or try hard enough. Families that do everything the conventional wisdom prescribes are still finishing every month with less than they started with. Young people are not receiving financial foundations from the generation before them. They are receiving financial chains, cycles of limitation dressed up as normal, deficit living presented as simply the way things are for people in their position. Households are positioned one unexpected crisis away from complete collapse, and the systems designed to provide stability are themselves groaning under the weight of their own unsustainable debt. This is the financial reality pressing against millions of households right now. And into that precise reality, with surgical precision, with covenant authority, with the full weight of divine promise beholding. And every verse Psalm 112 speaks, not with the language of interest rates and debt consolidation strategies, not with the vocabulary of market analysis, or the promises of any fiscal policy that any government has ever proposed, with the language of covenant, with the authority of a God who created wealth before any human being ever thought to accumulate it, who designed financial flourishing not as a reward for the fortunate few, but as an inheritance for those willing to align their lives with his principles, and who encoded that design into 10 verses of scripture that have outlasted every economic empire, every financial system, and every theory of prosperity that human civilization has ever produced. The man at the center of Psalm 112 is not distinguished by luck. He carries no exceptional advantage of birth position or natural gifting that places him beyond the reach of ordinary people. What separates him from every person around him is singular and available to every human being alive in this moment. He fears the Lord and delights greatly in his commandments. That is the entry point. That is the door. And what flows through that door is not a modest improvement on what life I would have produced otherwise. It is the complete transformation of the financial trajectory of an entire bloodline. Psalm 112 uses language that demands full attention. It declares that the wealth of the righteous shall endure forever, not through a favorable economic cycle, not until the next generation makes poor decisions, not until external circumstances conspire to erode what was built. Forever. That single word removes this psalm from the category of financial advice and places it firmly in the category of covenant declaration, because forever is not a word any human financial system has ever been able to honestly use. Markets do not last forever. Currencies do not endure forever. Empires built on wealth without righteousness have never survived forever. But the wealth of the man who fears God, Psalm 112, says it endures exactly that long. Here is the truth this generation has not been sufficiently taught. The truth that carries the power to break cycles that have operated in bloodlines for decades. Debt is not your destiny. Financial limitation is not the permanent condition of people who walk in covenant with God. Generational poverty is not a sentence handed down from. Heaven, it is a cycle, and every cycle contains within it the seed of its own breaking, the moment of intervention when the right truth, applied with the right faith, at the right point of decision, changes everything that comes after. This is that moment. Psalm 112 is that truth. The God who wrote it carries the authority to make it real in your household, not as a distant future possibility to be hoped for, but as a present covenant reality to be stepped into with both feet, with full conviction, and with the understanding that the wealth described in this psalm already has a name written on it. That name could belong to your household. That dynasty could begin with your generation. That cycle could end permanently, covenantally, generationally today. Before the promises of Psalm 112 can be fully received, the person they are promised to must be fully understood. This psalm does not scatter its declarations indiscriminately across every life that casually encounters it. It does not offer generational wealth as an entitlement disconnected from character, from alignment, from the daily choices that quietly determine the direction of a financial life over time. It paints a picture, trait-specific, honest, and demanding of the individual through whom heaven is willing to release a financial legacy that outlasts their own lifetime. And every feature of that portrait carries its own revelation about why the wealth comes, how it is sustained, and why it cannot ultimately be dismantled by any force the world brings against it. The first feature of the portrait is the fear of the Lord. The psalm opens without ambiguity and without delay. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord. This is the starting point, not by accident, not by literary convention, but by deliberate design. Because the fear of the Lord is not simply one spiritual quality among many that a person of faith might cultivate. It is the governing orientation of an entire life, the lens through which every decision is filtered. Every opportunity is evaluated. Every financial choice is weighed before it is made. The person who genuinely fears the Lord does not ask first what is profitable. They ask first what is right. They do not evaluate an opportunity primarily by what it will produce. They evaluate it by whether it can be entered with integrity and exited with a clean conscience. And here is the extraordinary paradox at the heart of Psalm 112. The one who consistently prioritizes righteousness above profit ends up with more lasting wealth than the one who spent an entire lifetime pursuing profit alone. Because the fear of the Lord does not merely shape spiritual character, it reorganizes the financial life from the inside out. It produces a person who cannot be corrupted by a shortcut when the shortcut is available and tempting, who cannot be seduced by a dishonest gain when the dishonest gain is dressed as wisdom, who cannot be moved to compromise what they know to be right simply because the financial pressure in the moment is making compromise feel reasonable. That integrity sustained over time, tested and proven through seasons of genuine pressure, becomes the very bedrock upon which Psalm 112's durable wealth is constructed. The second feature of the portrait is delight in God's commandments. Who delights greatly in his commandments? Every word in that phrase carries weight, but none more than the word delights. Not tolerates, not reluctantly obeys when the consequences of disobedience become too costly to ignore, not complies with under spiritual obligation, while quietly resenting the limitation. Delights. This is the portrait of a person for whom the word of God regarding money, generosity, stewardship, integrity, and covenant is not experienced as a restriction on financial life, but as a revelation of how financial life was designed to function at its highest and most fruitful level. The commandments of God are not the ceiling of prosperity, they are the architecture of it. Every principle embedded in Scripture regarding how wealth is handled, how it is shared, how it is stewarded and grown and transferred, these are not rules imposed on an otherwise free financial system. They are the design specifications of the system God built for those willing to operate within it. The one who delights in those commandments is not merely obeying, they are cooperating with the blueprint of their own flourishing, aligning themselves with the financial intelligence that exceeds anything human wisdom has assembled. The third feature of the portrait is generosity practiced without fear. He has dispersed abroad. He has given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. The person Psalm 112 describes does not approach generosity as a reluctant obligation or an occasional emotional response to visible need. They disperse. The Hebrew word carries the image of scattering seed, deliberate, wide, consistent, and rooted in the confidence that what is scattered will return. This person gives with the open-handed assurance of someone who has settled a question that most people never fully settle. The question of whether their supply is governed by the size of their account or by the faithfulness of their God. When that question is genuinely resolved in favor of God's faithfulness, generosity stops being a sacrifice and becomes a strategy, the most powerful financial strategy available to a human being, because it activates a divine economic law that operates entirely outside the boundaries of natural financial logic. Generosity in the economy of Psalm 112 does not diminish the giver, it establishes them. It produces a righteousness, a legacy, a reputation for right living and right giving that endures not for a favorable season but forever. No investment vehicle offers that return. No financial instrument produces that kind of permanent, generationally transferable result. The person who understands this does not give relu. Concurrently, they give strategically, joyfully, and consistently, because they understand that every act of genuine generosity is a seed planted in soil that God Himself has committed to make fruitful. The fourth feature of the portrait is unshakable stability in the face of bad news. He will not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is steadfast, trusting in the Lord. This feature of the portrait may be the most practically significant for the financial life, because financial decisions made from a position of fear are almost always decisions that accelerate the very outcome the fear was dreading. The desperate investment, the panic withdrawal, the hasty agreement entered under pressure that carries consequences far beyond the immediate crisis it was meant to solve. Fear in the financial life is not merely an uncomfortable emotion, it is an active force that drives people outside the boundaries of wisdom and into the territory of decisions they will spend years recovering from. The person Psalm 112 describes is not insulated from bad news. They are not living in a financial bubble where difficult reports never reach them and threatening seasons never arrive. They exist in the same volatile, uncertain, pressure-filled world as every other person, and they receive the same reports, face the same market realities, navigate the same economic turbulence. But their heart does not move. It is steadfast, anchored not to the fluctuating performance of any earthly system, but to the unchanging faithfulness of a God whose economy has never experienced a recession, whose resources have never been subject to depletion, and whose covenant commitments have never been cancelled by any external circumstance in all of recorded human history. That stability is not emotional detachment. It is not the absence of awareness regarding genuine financial pressure. It is the presence of a deeper knowing, the settled conviction that the God who made the promise of Psalm 112 is more reliable than any threat arrayed against the household He has committed to establish. The fifth feature of the portrait is wisdom in the conduct of financial affairs. A good man deals graciously and lends, he will guide his affairs with discretion. The person this psalm describes does not stumble through their financial life reactively, making decisions by impulse or desperation or the pressure of the immediate moment. They guide their affairs actively, intentionally, with the wisdom that comes from walking closely with the God who created every financial law the universe operates by. They deal graciously, meaning their manner of conducting business reflects the character of the God they serve. They are known for integrity. Their word is reliable. Their agreements are honored. Their dealings leave the people on the other side of every transaction better, not diminished. This is the portrait in 5 features. 5 dimensions of character that together describe the person through whom Psalm 112 releases everything it promises: generational wealth, enduring righteousness, supernatural illumination, unshakable stability, and the legacy that outlasts the lifetime of the one who built it. And the portrait is not of a spiritual elite beyond the reach of ordinary life. It is not the description of a person born into advantage, gifted beyond normal human capacity, or positioned by fortunate circumstance in a place that others cannot access. It is the description of anyone in any generation, starting from any point, willing to be genuinely transformed into it. The wealth is not waiting for a perfect person. It is waiting for a committed one. A person who fears God above financial pressure, who delights in the covenant above the convenience of compromise, who gives with open hands, stands with a steadfast heart, and guides their affairs with the wisdom of someone who knows exactly whose economy they are operating in. That person unlocks everything Psalm 112 was written to release. And that person starting today could be you. Now the promises, now the specific covenant-backed declarations that Psalm 112 releases over the household that has built the portrait described in the previous section, the household that fears the Lord, delights in his commandments, gives generously, stands steadfast, and guides its affairs with wisdom. These are not motivational statements. They are not the hopeful projections of optimistic religious thinking. They are declarative statements made by a God who does not exaggerate, does not overpromise, and has never in all of human history failed to honor a covenant he initiated. 7 declarations, 7 dimensions of financial transformation, 7 walls of a dynasty that once built on this foundation, Scripture says will not be moved. The first declaration is mighty descendants. His descendants will be mighty on earth. The generation of the upright will be blessed. The wealth released through Psalm 112 does not terminate at the boundary of one lifetime. It does not peak in the generation that first walked in the fear of the Lord and then gradually diminish as it passes through successive generations. It multiplies. The children of the righteous household are not merely recipients of a material inheritance. They are positioned by God to be mighty, not comfortable, not merely provided for, mighty, influential in their generation, established in their purpose, carrying an anointing on their lives that traces directly back to the covenant decision made by the generation before them. This means that every decision toward righteousness made today has consequences that reach forward in time further than can be fully calculated in the present moment. The child watching how the household responds to financial pressure is being shaped. The young person observing whether integrity is maintained when compromise would be easier is receiving formation that will govern their own financial decisions for decades. The generation downstream from this moment does not start from zero. They start from the foundation being laid right now. And they build higher because the ground beneath them is already established by covenant rather than by circumstance. The second declaration is wealth residing permanently in the house. Wealth and riches are in his house, and his righteousness endures forever. Wealth is in the house, not passing through it on its way somewhere else, not visiting occasionally when external conditions happen to be favorable, not fluctuating in and out based on the performance of any earthly system. In it, residing there as a settled, established, permanent feature of the household. And the righteousness that produced the wealth endures forever, which means the source that generated it is not a one-time event, but an ongoing condition. The well does not run dry because the well is not the household's own capacity. It is the righteousness of God operating continuously through a life aligned with his covenant. This declaration directly confronts the spirit of financial instability that has made so many households feel as though prosperity is something that happens to them briefly. Lie and then leaves a visitor rather than a resident. Psalm 112 declares that for the righteous household, wealth is a resident. It belongs there. It is as natural a feature of that home as the love within it, because it flows from the same source, a God who has committed himself to the flourishing of those who walk with him. The third declaration is light arising in seasons of darkness. Unto the upright there arises light in the darkness. Every financial journey, without exception, passes through dark seasons where the path forward is genuinely unclear, where every visible indicator seems to point toward retreat rather than advance, where the honest assessment of the situation produces more questions than answers and more uncertainty than confidence. The world's response to financial darkness is panic, paralysis, or desperate action taken without wisdom. But Psalm 112 declares something entirely different. For the upright household, light arises, not after the darkness passes, not when conditions improve sufficiently for the way forward to become obvious to natural analysis. In the darkness, while it is still dark, while the uncertainty is still present and the press is still, real light arises. This is supernatural financial illumination. This is the wisdom that identifies which door to open when every door appears closed. This is the discernment that sees the opportunity embedded within the crisis while everyone around sees only the crisis. This is the divine intelligence that operates precisely at the limit of human understanding, and it is promised specifically to the upright, specifically in their darkest financial moments, specifically when they need it most. The fourth declaration is gracious and prosperous dealings. A good man deals graciously and lends, he will guide his affairs with discretion. This declaration establishes that the prosperity of Psalm 112 flows through a specific manner of conducting financial affairs, not through aggressive accumulation at the expense of others, not through exploitation of advantage, not through the compression of people beneath one's financial ambition. It flows through grace, through a quality of dealing that leaves the other party treated with dignity and fairness, through lending that reflects generosity rather than predatory intent, through the guidance of financial affairs with the kin. D of discretion that reflects wisdom operating at a level above the ordinary pressures and temptations of financial life. The practical implication of this declaration is significant. The financial reputation of the righteous household becomes one of its greatest assets. People seek to do business with those whose word is reliable, whose integrity is consistent, and whose manner of dealing reflects something beyond mere self-interest. That reputation opens doors that financial resources alone cannot open, and it sustains relationships that become the channels through which extraordinary opportunities flow into the household over time. The fifth declaration is permanent, unshakable establishment. Surely he will never be shaken. The righteous will be in everlasting remembrance. The righteous household will never be shaken, not never tested, not never pressured, not never brought to a moment where the stability of what has been built is genuinely challenged by forces outside its control. But never shaken, never moved from its foundation, never dislodged from the covenant ground on which it stands, never reduced to nothing by any combination of financial threats that the world can assemble against it. The foundation is simply not made of the same material that economic forces are designed to erode. And the righteous will be in everlasting remembrance, meaning the legacy built on this foundation outlasts not only the lifetime of the one who built it, but the very circumstances that tried to limit and diminish it along the way. Generations hence will know the name of the household that chose righteousness over convenience, covenant over compromise, and God's economy over the world system, because the fruit of that choice will still be producing a harvest long after the choice itself has passed into history. The sixth declaration is triumph over every opposing force. He will triumph over his enemies. The word triumph carries no ambiguity. It does not say the righteous household will survive its enemies. It does not say it will endure or cope or eventually recover from what the enemies inflicted. It says triumph, which is the language of decisive, complete, and final victory over every force arrayed against the financial flourishing of the household aligned with this covenant. Financial enemies take many forms. Systems designed to perpetuate cycles of death. EBT, cultural narratives that normalize limitation, internal enemies of fear and impatience and unbelief that undermine the covenant posture from within. Psalm 112 declares triumph over all of it, not as an eventual possibility, but as a covenant certainty for the household that holds its position. The seventh declaration is the transfer of wealth from those who built without righteousness. The desire of the wicked will perish. This final declaration is the most sweeping of all, and it must be received with the gravity it deserves. What has been accumulated without the fear of the Lord, what has been built through exploitation and injustice, what has been assembled through the violation of covenant principles, it does not endure. The desire of the wicked perishes. The wealth without righteousness at its foundation does not have permanent occupancy in unrighteous hands. And what does not remain in unrighteous hands is positioned by the sovereign design of a just God to find its way into the hands of those whose righteousness does endure, those whose foundation is covenant, whose character is integrity, whose generosity has been sowing seeds in the economy of heaven for the harvest that is now arriving. This is not vindictive theology. This is the covenant law of a just God operating exactly as he designed it to operate, ensuring that resources ultimately reside in the hands of those who will steward them in alignment with his purposes, his generosity, and his glory. 7 declarations. 7 dimensions of a financial dynasty built not on the shifting sand of market conditions or human ingenuity alone, but on the unshakable ground of covenant with the God who owns everything that exists. The declarations are not waiting for a future generation more deserving than this one. They are not reserved for a spiritual elite whose level of righteousness exceeds what ordinary people can realistically attain. They are active. They are available. They are extended right now to every household willing to position itself within the portrait of the person Psalm 112 was written to describe. The architecture of the dynasty is complete. Every wall is built. Every declaration is in place. Every promise is backed by the full weight of the covenant character of God. What remains now is not more information. What remains is a decision. Every truth carried through these 3 sections has been moving toward this moment, not toward more information to be stored and forgotten, not toward inspiration that produces a temporary emotional response and then quietly dissolves before the week is finished, toward a decision, the kind of decision that does not merely improve a financial situation, but fundamentally restructures the trajectory of a household, breaks a generational cycle that has operated long enough, and plants the first permanent stake of a dynasty that will still be standing and still be growing long after the person who planted it has completed their assignment on this earth. The wealth declared in Psalm 112 is not theoretical. The promises embedded in its verses are not aspirational language designed to make difficult circumstances feel more bearable. They are covenant commitments made by a God whose faithfulness is the most reliable constant in the universe, and they are extended right now to every household willing to meet the conditions on which they rest. Not perfect households. Not households that have never made financial mistakes, never accumulated debt, never operated outside wisdom. Households that are willing from this day forward to reorient everything, the values, the habits, the priorities, the manner of dealing, the posture toward generosity around the fear of the Lord and the delight in His commandments that Psalm 112 identifies as the entry point into everything else it promises. Here is what this moment requires. Establish the fear of the Lord as the governing principle of every financial decision. This is where the dynasty begins, and nothing downstream from it is accessible without it being genuinely settled at this level. The fear of the Lord in the financial life is not an abstract spiritual concept that exists separately from the practical realities of income, expenses, debt, and investment. It is the specific daily commitment to filter every financial decision through the question of what honors God before the question of what produces the most immediate personal advantage. It is the decision to honor God with the first portion of every financial increase, not after every bill is addressed, not after every pressure is resolved, not when conditions become comfortable enough to make giving feel less costly, but first as an act of covenant acknowledgement that the source of all provision. Zion is not personal effort alone, but the blessing of God operating through personal effort. That commitment will be tested. The test will arrive in the form of a month where the numbers do not appear to allow it. A season where the pressure makes the first portion feel irresponsible. A moment where every practical calculation argues against it. And that moment, precisely that moment, is when the fear of the Lord either proves itself genuine or reveals itself as conditional. The household that holds its covenant posture through the test is the household that moves into the next level of what Psalm 112 promises. Because the test is not an obstacle to the blessing, it is the doorway through which the blessing is released. Activate the covenant law of generosity beginning today, not eventually. The instruction to give when debt is present will encounter resistance from natural financial logic, from the legitimate awareness of real obligations, from the reasonable instinct that resources in short supply should be preserved rather than dispersed. That resistance is understandable. It is also exactly what Psalm 112 is designed to overcome in the financial life of the household will. Linked to trust it. The covenant law of generosity does not operate within the boundaries of natural financial logic, it operates above them. Through a divine economic mechanism that natural analysis was never designed to measure or predict. Begin giving with consistency and with intentionality. Not randomly, not reactively to emotional appeals, but as a disciplined, Covenant act rooted in the understanding that every seed dispersed in the economy of heaven is subject to a harvest law that God himself has committed to honor. The return on generosity in the economy of Psalm 112 is not measured in the same time frame as natural financial returns, but it is more certain, more durable, and more far-reaching than any return any earthly investment has ever produced. Disperse the seed, trust the soil, honor the law, and then watch the financial atmosphere of the household begin to shift in ways that cannot be fully accounted for by any natural analysis of what was sown. Speak the declarations of Psalm 112 over every specific financial reality in the household. Words spoken with covenant authority over a financial life carry weight in the spirit realm that directly influences what manifests. S in the natural realm. This is not positive thinking repackaged in religious language. This is the operation of a spiritual law established by the God who created the universe by speaking, who said, "Let there be," and there was, who demonstrated for all of creation that words released in alignment with his will have the power to bring realities into existence that did not previously exist. Speak over the dead, declare that it is subject to the covenant and that its power over the household is broken. Speak over the income, declare that it is increasing because righteousness is its foundation and because the blessing of the Lord makes rich and adds no sorrow with it. Speak over every business endeavor, every career decision, every financial opportunity currently under consideration. Declare that light is arising in every place of uncertainty, that wisdom is guiding every affair with discretion, that the deals conducted from this household are conducted with grace and produce outcomes that honor God and establish the family. Do not wait for the financial circumstances to change before making the declaration. The declaration precedes the change. It is the instrument through which the change is initiated. Speak it daily, speak it specifically, speak it with the settled conviction of a household that has read the covenant, met the conditions, and now stands on the promise with both feet firmly planted. Deliberately transfer the wealth principles of Psalm 112 to the next generation. The generational dimension of this psalm does not transfer automatically through proximity. Children in a righteous household do not absorb the financial wisdom of Psalm 112 simply by living under the same roof with parents who practice it. It must be taught explicitly, consistently, practically, and early enough to form the foundational financial values before the world system has the opportunity to lay its own competing foundation. Teach the children in the household to give before they spend, not as a religious exercise disconnected from real financial life, but as the first and most important financial habit of a covenant person. Teach them that integrity in financial dealings is not a disadvantage that costs them opportunities. It is the covenant advantage that opens doors no amount of cleverness or connection could otherwise unlock. Teach them that the fear of the Lord is not a limitation on financial ambition, but the very engine of financial dynasty. That the person who honors God with their wealth does not end up with less but with more. And not only with more, but with the kind of more that endures, that compounds, that flows into generations they will never personally meet. The children who receive this teaching are not starting from zero. They are starting from the foundation being built right now, and the dynasty that begins in this generation reaches through them into dimensions of time and influence that cannot yet be seen from where this household currently stands. Position the household for the great wealth transfer through active righteousness, not passive waiting. The desire of the wicked shall perish. That is not a statement requiring interpretation. It is a declaration requiring positioning. Wealth without righteousness at its foundation is already in transition, moving by the sovereign design of a just God toward the hands that will steward it in alignment with his purposes. The question is not whether the transfer is happening. The question is whether the household is positioned to be a destination. Positioning is deliberate. It is the daily cultivation of the character, the integrity, the generosity, and the covenant alignment that makes a household the kind of trustworthy steward that heaven identifies as a right destination for resources currently sitting in wrong hands. It is becoming through consistent practice, through sustained commitment, through the refusal to lower the standard when lowering it would be easier, the household that can be trusted with more because it has proven faithful with what it currently has. Become that household. Build that trustworthiness. establish that reputation with God first, and then with the people and systems through which his blessing flows, and watch as resources that were never generated by the household's own effort begin finding their way through doors that no human strategy alone could have opened. Debt does not have to write the final chapter of this household's financial story. Limitation does not have to be the inheritance passed to the next generation. The cycle, however long it has operated, however deeply it has embedded itself in the patterns and expectations of the bloodline, is not stronger than the covenant of Psalm 112. It is not more durable than the promise of a God who declared that the wealth of the righteous endures forever. It is not more permanent than the dynasty that begins the moment one household in one generation makes the decision to fear the Lord above every financial pressure, to delight in his commandments above every competing voice, and to step fully, finally, and without reservation into the inheritance that has been waiting with their name written on it since before the foundations of the world. The declarations are active. The covenant is open. The dynasty is ready to begin. The only thing left is the household willing to build it.